Good morning, friends. Let's continue with Chapter 1, Section 3, the said and the saying. It is not the inescapable fate in which being immediately includes the statement of being's other, not due to the hold and the said over the saying, to the oracle in which the said is immobilized. All right, I got to read that again. Is not the inescapable fate in which being immediately includes the statement of being's other, not due to the hold the said has over the saying, to the oracle in which the said is immobilized. Then would not the bankruptcy of transcendence be but that of a theology that thematizes the transcending in the Logos, assigns a term to the passing of transcendence, conceals it into a world behind the scenes, and installs what it says in war and in matter, which are the inevitable modalities of the fate woven by being in its interest? Is it not that the essence, qua persistence in essence, qua conatus and interest, would be reducible to a word play? Saying is not a game. Antecedent to the verbal signs it conjugates, to the linguistic systems and the semantic glimmerings of forward preceding languages, it is the proximity of one to the other, the commitment of an approach, the one for the other, the very signifyingness of signification. But is approach to be defined by commitment and not rather commitment by approach? Perhaps because of current moral maxims in which the word neighbor occurs, we have ceased to be surprised by all that is involved in proximity and approach. The original or pre-original saying, what is put forth in the foreword, weaves an intrigue of responsibility. It sets forth an order more grave than being and antecedent to being. By comparison, being appears like a game. Being is play or detente, without responsibility, where everything possible is permitted. But is play free of interest? Right off, a stakes, money, or honor is attached to it. Does not disinterestedness, without compensation, without eternal life, without the pleasingness of happiness, complete gratuity, indicate an extreme gravity and not the fallacious frivolity of play? By anticipation, let us ask, does not this gravity, where being's essa is inverted, refer to this pre-original language, the responsibility of one for the other, the substitution of one for the other, and the condition or the uncondition of being hostage, which thus takes form? But this pre-original saying does not move into language in which saying and said are correlative of one another, and the saying is subordinated to its theme. It can be shown that even the distinction between being and entities is born by the amphibology of the said, though this distinction and this amphibology are not thereby reducible to verbal artifices. The correlation of the saying and the said, that is, the subordination of the saying to the said, to the linguistic system and to ontology, is the price that manifestation demands. In language qua said, everything is conveyed before us, be it at the price of a betrayal. Language is ancillary and thus indispensable. At this moment, language is serving a research conducted in view of disengaging the otherwise than being, or being's other, outside of the themes in which they already show themselves unfaithfully as being's essence, but in which they do not show themselves. Language permits us to utter, be it by betrayal, this outside of being, this exception to being, as though being's other were an event of being. Being, Its cognition and the said in which it shows itself signify in a saying which, relative to being, forms an exception. But it is in the said that both this exception and the birth of cognition show themselves. But the fact that the exception shows itself and becomes truth in the said cannot serve as a pretext to take as an absolute the apophantic variant of the saying, which is ancillary or angelic. An ancillary or angelic variant, however sublime it be, the apophantic form of the saying is only mediating. For thematization, in which being's essence is conveyed before us, and theory and thought, its contemporaries, do not attest to some fall of the saying. They are motivated by the pre-original vocation of the saying, by responsibility itself. We will see more of this further. But apophansis. Apophansis. But apophansis does not exhaust what there is in saying. The apophansis presupposes the language that answers with responsibility, and the gravity of this response is beyond the measure of being. The impossibility of declining responsibility is reflected only in the scruple or remorse which precedes or follows this refusal. The reality of the real ignores scruples. But, though naturally superficial, essence does not exclude the retreats of responsibility in the way that being excludes nothingness. And the gravity of the responsible saying retains a reference to being, whose nature will have to be made clear. Moral impossibility is not of lesser gravity. It does not situate responsibility in some low tension zone at the confines of being and non-being. This gravity of the otherwise than being shows now, in a still confused way, its affinity with ethics. We have been seeking the otherwise than being from the beginning, and as soon as it is conveyed before us, it is betrayed in the said that dominates the saying which states it. A methodological problem arises here. Whether the pre-original element of saying, the anarchical, the non-original, as we designate it, can be led to betray itself by showing itself in a theme, if an anarchaeology is possible, and whether this betrayal can be reduced, whether one can at the same time know and free the known of the marks with which thematization leaves on it by subordinating it to ontology. Everything shows itself at the price of this betrayal. Everything shows itself at the price of this betrayal, even the unsayable. In this betrayal, the indiscretion with regard to the unsayable, which is probably the very task of philosophy, becomes possible. When stated in propositions, the unsayable, or the anarchical, espouses the forms of formal logic. The beyond being is posited in doxic theses and glimmers in the amphibology of being and beings, in which beings dissimulate being. The otherwise than being is stated in a saying that must also be unsaid in order to thus extract the otherwise than being from the said in which it already comes to signify but a being otherwise. Does the beyond being, which philosophy states, and states by reason of the very transcendence of the beyond, fall unavoidably into the forms of the ancillary statement? Can this saying and this being unsaid be assembled? Can they be at the same time? In fact, to require this simultaneity is already to reduce being's other to being and not being. We must stay with the extreme situation of a diachronic thought. Let me read that again. We must stay with the extreme situation of a diachronic thought. Skepticism, at the dawn of philosophy, set forth and betrayed this diachrony of this very conveying and betraying. To conceive the otherwise than being requires, perhaps, as much audacity as skepticism shows, when it does not hesitate to affirm the impossibility of statement while venturing to realize this impossibility by the very statement of this impossibility. If, after the innumerable irrefutable refutations which logical thought sets against it, skepticism has the gall to return, and it always returns as philosophy's illegitimate child, it is because in the contradiction which logic sees in it the at the same time of the contradictories is missing, because a secret diachrony commands this ambiguous or enigmatic way of speaking, and because, in general signification, signifies beyond synchrony, beyond essence. Holy cow. That's section 3. I'm going to take the time right now to reread that final paragraph of section 3. Can this saying and this being unsaid be assembled? Can they be at the same time? In fact, to require this simultaneity is already to reduce being's other to being and not being. We must stay with the extreme situation of a diachronic thought. Skepticism at the dawn of philosophy set forth and betrayed the diachrony of this very conveying and betraying. To conceive the otherwise than being requires, perhaps, as much audacity as skepticism shows, when it does not hesitate to affirm the impossibility of statement while venturing to realize this impossibility by the very statement of this impossibility. If, after the innumerable irrefutable refutations with which logical thought sets against it, skepticism has the gall to return, and it always returns as philosophy's illegitimate child, it is because in the contradiction which logic sees in it at the same time of the contradictories is missing. Gosh darn it, it's that clause which really gets me. Okay, so if skepticism has the gall to return, it is because in the contradiction which logic sees in it, the at the same time of the contradictories is missing. It has the gall to return because the contradictories is missing, because a secret diachrony commands this ambiguous or enigmatic way of speaking. If skepticism has the gall to return, it is because a secret diachrony commands this ambiguous or enigmatic way of speaking, and because, in general, signification signifies beyond synchrony, beyond essence. So skepticism, I think he's saying, is diachronic. It speaks through diachrony. It is a form of diachronic thought. And the relationship between saying and said is one of diachrony. All right, let's stop there today, friends. We'll pick it up with section 4, subjectivity, next time.